Before we get started, let's go over some key terms that will be helpful to know as you make your way through the mobility content. First is irradiation. That is a word that you are going to hear come out of my mouth a lot. I'm going to say take a breath in and irradiate. What does that mean? Well, in order to contract a muscle maximally, it means that we have to recruit the neighboring muscles in our body. So as a demonstration, I want you to bring your hands together. And I want you to use just the muscles in your hands pressing against one another. And feel how much force you're able to produce just using the muscles in your hands. Okay, now we're going to irradiate by bringing in those forearm muscles. So start to contract your forearms as well as your hands against one another and feel how much more force you're able to produce here. Let's take it up another notch. Bring your upper arms, bring your biceps, your shoulders, maybe even your pec muscles into it. Really contract, pushing your hands and using all of the muscles in your arms, and feel how much more force you are able to generate. Relax. Okay, so that's an example of irradiation. And when I say in our mobility videos, I want you to irradiate, what I want you to do is create a full body internal tension. It's a contraction. It's not something that you're going to be pushing against externally, but I want you to feel for rooting your feet into the floor if you're standing. You're going to tense up the muscles in your quads. You're going to squeeze your glutes. You're going to turn on those abs as if I was going to come and give you a little punch in the stomach and you would want to brace for that. You're going to make two fists, or you can open your hands. And I want you to really feel for squeezing all of those muscles in your arms. So imagine if I came up and tried to push you over, you want to make your body so solid that I would not be able to actually push you. If you're in a position where you're laying down, you can try flexing your toes back, but it's that same concept of really taking a big breath in and creating that internal tension, bracing yourself throughout your body. So when you hear me say irradiate, I will usually also give a cue of how much to irradiate. If I say irradiate 30 to 50%, what I mean by that is you're going to do a full body contraction that is 30 to 50% of your maximum effort. If you hear me say take it up to your greatest, safest effort, that could be 80%, it could be 90%, it could be 60%. It really depends on how you're feeling that day, how rested you are, how fresh your nervous system is, and how hard you want to be working. I will say that if you do have the capacity to really ramp up that intensity and to irradiate to a great degree, you're going to get better results with your mobility work. So when you can do that, go ahead and irradiate to a higher degree. Okay, next, before we get into internal and external rotation as well as pelvic tilt, I just want to preface all of that by saying that this is the same for the strength training, but with mobility training, we never push through any kind of pain, pinching, or cramping. So if you experience any kind of discomfort that is more than what's normal with regular exercise, which can be uncomfortable, then you would want to back out of whatever position you're in, maybe reposition the limb that you're working with, or chat with me and we can find an alternative position that will be more comfortable to accommodate you. A lot of times we can use our props, we can use yoga blocks, if you have blankets or pillows, maybe a chair. Those are all kinds of things that you can use to help make base positions more comfortable as you're working on your mobility. Okay, so now let's get into internal and external rotation. You're going to hear me say those terms a lot. And in addition to giving those cues, I will also say things like thumb in or thumb out. I think it's good for people to learn all different kinds of cues. So, you know, while right now internal, external rotation might sound like I'm speaking Greek, by the end of your first mobility video, hopefully you'll feel a little bit more comfortable with these terms. So if we're talking about internal and external rotation at the shoulder, An internal rotation with the arm in this position would be bringing that forearm down towards the floor, whereas an external rotation would be bringing that forearm back towards the wall behind you. So if I'm to straighten my arm out and then come into internal rotation, that's bringing the thumb down towards the floor. This humerus, my arm bone, is rotating internally here as the thumb goes in. As I rotate out and the thumb goes back, that is external rotation. So a good way to remember that is internal, thumb goes in. External, thumb goes out. Now when the arm is down by the side, the same thing applies. Internal rotation, that thumb is going to rotate in, and external rotation, it's going to rotate out. When we come overhead, for example, in the position of shoulder cars, this is where it can get a little bit more sticky in that as we're bringing that arm up overhead, let's say we're coming into shoulder flexion, internal rotation from this overhead position, the palm and thumb are going to rotate away from the body. So that can be a little bit confusing because people might think internal would go this way. Internal rotation from this position, thumb and bicep rotates away, and then we reach the arm behind as we go through our shoulder cars. From that overhead position, external rotation is the other way. It would be trying to show the palm of your hand to the wall behind you, or bringing your pinky in towards the center of your body. So just remember, when the arm is overhead, internal rotation, that palm and thumb rotates away, and external rotation, it goes in the opposite direction. Okay, next we have adduction and abduction. Now, don't worry, you do not have to memorize these terms. You're not going to be quizzed on them, but I just like to go over them so you have an idea when you hear me say adduction or abduction. And it's just because the two words adduction, abduction sound so similar that we say adduction to differentiate so you know which one we're talking about. This one has kind of a funny way that I like to remember it. When I was in personal training school back in 2007, I would think about when the arm is traveling away from the body, it would be like an alien abduction. So that would be abduction. The arm or the limb is traveling away from the midline, away from the center of the body. Whereas adduction or adduction, the limb is traveling in towards the center of the body. So if my arm is out here, abduction, traveling away, it's being abducted by an alien, and adduction, it's traveling in towards the midline. Same thing with the leg. Hip abduction is this motion with the leg coming out. Hip adduction, working the inner thigh, is the leg crossing the midline or coming in towards the midline. And if we are looking at rotation at the hip, internal rotation of the femur, which is the thigh bone, would mean that lower leg has to kick out in order for this bone to rotate inwards. It's a little bit counterintuitive. So we think internal rotation, a lot of people will say, well, I'm going to bring my lower leg in. That's actually opposite. So when the lower leg comes in, that's an expression of external rotation. Your femur bone is rotating outward. Lower leg goes out, this is internal rotation. Again, don't worry, you don't have to memorize this, but just a good thing to review before we get started. Now lastly, I want to go over positioning of the pelvis. This is another one that's important to know and gets really confusing. So we're going to go over anterior and posterior pelvic tilt. And I also have another little fun way that you can remember this one. So when we're talking about the positions of the pelvis, when we are rotating the pelvis anteriorly or forward, it's like we're sticking our butts out and arching the low back. So think anterior pelvic tilt, Donald Duck. So we reach the hips back, this is anterior pelvic tilt. The opposite is called posterior pelvic tilt, or Pink Panther. So in posterior pelvic tilt, we tuck the tailbone under and we flatten out the low back. Anterior pelvic tilt, posterior pelvic tilt. Okay, so I will be referencing that when we get to certain exercises around the hips and the spine. I'll also be using Donald Duck Pink Panther cues because that will hopefully help you to remember. And hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know, and thanks for watching.